Okay, so I thought of a couple more things I wanted to talk to you about. Since I last did this here, I'm going to put a still picture of what I did on this area before. This is a stone wall that's wrapping around and going into these smaller houses into the background. This is a street light that's there. I ended up putting this in with the palette knife, and I didn't like it because it was sticking out so much and catching a lot of light, and so it was distracting to the whole picture actually. And I ended up letting it sit for a day or two, and then I just scraped it all off with the palette knife here. Just scraped off the highlights. I didn't want to lose everything that I had figured out again, and I like the texture of it, but it was just too much. Hopefully when I show you this still picture, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Maybe you'll agree with me or not, but okay. So when I came back to start this again, I did what I was telling you to do, stand back and look at the piece and say, what's the worst? Okay, now here's my reference. Do you see in the reference print, it's not a very good print, but I don't care because I don't want to be copying prints all the time. But you can see how dark it is, and really the only thing that really stands out are the lights. Although I think it'll show up in video better. You'll see some of the details in there. When I come back to my painting here, I don't see that as much, and I'm kind of glad for that, because one of the things that a photograph does is have such high contrast. You do tend to lose a lot of detail in the shadows. So when I take a look at this, I decided just now that I needed to darken this building, have it go light up. Whoops, sorry, I'm not doing well with holding the camera and talking. Okay, so that's weird. I changed the adjustment. Okay, so the lighter section is here, and I'm going to gradate it down here, and there is a reason for that. There's more light bouncing up in here, and then you get behind this light's going this way, and that leaves this falling in shadow. And then this building is on the side plane. It also needed to be dark. The thing that I want to stand back and look at now is, have I made this too dark? I want some contrast between these two, although in the photographic reference there isn't much change between the two. I don't know if you can see that or not. Here we go. So, okay. But regardless of my original, because remember, nobody looks at the original, I want to stand back and evaluate this. The reason that this becomes difficult for me to gauge overall with the whole picture is because this next to it is too light. There's too much difference between this and that. So it's really difficult as you're doing a transition to make something different from the rest of it, to darken something relatively speaking. You always have to remind yourself, this is too light, and so it's going to look like, wow, that's just way too much contrast. I've got to note that. But just remind yourself you're in a process, and you have to, every time you get overwhelmed, take it back and say, what's a yes or no question? Do I need to have this go darker, or do I need to have this go lighter, or a little bit of both? But right now, I know that I just added this darker, so I'm going to go ahead and darken this, and frankly, the roofs are sticking out too much, too high chroma, They look like not quite daylight, but they don't look like they're in about 2 or 3 in the morning, which is when I snapped the photo of this image. So I need to darken this. The thing is, I like this relationship that I had done here, where the shadow and the crease was dark, and then it was darker here, and I like that. So I need to figure out a way to make all of this stuff work together, because it's all about relationships. Here you can see I've added a bit of over-exaggerated, because I was actually talking to Skype with a friend of mine, as he called. But anyway, I noticed that this line wasn't straight down, and the problem is with architecture, if I had this one going straight and this one going cattywampus over this way, or anyway, it was just not going to work right. And sometimes I don't see the straight lines as much, but I want the verticals to be straight and let the horizontals do whatever perspective will make it go. So anyway, I'm going to go back over this with a darker tone and blend it in. Right now I just wanted to remind myself, which is another reason I do high contrast stuff, is that it reminds myself, because I look at it and go, ooh, gosh, what was that? And then oh yeah, I wanted to straighten that line. So then I'll fix all that stuff. So I actually kind of really love this little interaction of the villages and a little bit of the greenery that's showing around in there, and then to get the fluorescent light. It's kind of fun. this is what I'm going to be doing but when I get back to the big overall point is when I stand back and take a look at this piece, I think, okay, I do like the dark that I put here. It's just totally black and dry, and I like this, and I like this curve. I don't want these villages here to be nearly as dark as they are in my original, in part because, again, I want to emphasize this circular shape built up of rectangles that curves around again in an S-like form, cracking the whip, I guess, up to the Pieve. And so I want this to be my subject. I don't want it to be so dark that you can't see it. Another thing that I did that I don't think I mentioned in another video is that I like to look at this when I turn the light off at night and I just turn on the little lamp next to my bed. I like to look at this in a different kind of light. It helps me to see the relationship of the overall tones. So it's also kind of fun when things look different as they do in different kind of lights. So I'm not as picky about the light source that I paint with. A lot of my friends are into, oh, you've got to paint with northern light or nothing else will do. And I'm just not that fussed about it. I think it's kind of fun to work with whatever I've got. And then, I mean, it is true sometimes. If you've read my street painting book, I described the situation where Johnny and I had two brand new artists come join us, and they didn't know what they were doing at all, and we ended up teaching them, and then we had to pay them because we split all the money up by the hours that we were all working there, and that was not really fun. But it turned out one of the guys was coloring one of the faces at night as the tungsten light came on, and he was using way too much yellow because he didn't think about the fact that in the tungsten light everything is going to look normalized, but then when you put daylight on it, it's going to look way too yellow. So it was kind of funny the next morning when we came back for our 2-day drawing in this case, that his face was just garishly jaundiced. So that's something to consider. But when I say I'm not too fussed about the light, I do want to work something where I can actually see what I'm doing. But I like to take the pieces out into the actual sun and daylight to see what's really going on with this. But again, for me, turning out the lights is another way to see something that is not necessarily evidence. Kind of like taking the mirror and reversing the shapes as I look behind me at the mirror to see what it looks like, because it's a fresh eye. And when you work alone, a lot of times you've got to have a fresh eye because you don't have someone else there going, hey, what you doing there, Anyway, so I'm going to quit and I'm going to keep painting for a bit, and then we'll come back and see how this is progressing. Okay? Ciao for now. Ciao, ciao. Alright, so I found my tripod and thought we would try this. What I know is that mentally it's difficult to keep knocking these stones down if I don't have the background proper. And I didn't have anything in there, in this area of the trees. You may remember there was a bit of the Campitura coming through here. Sorry, I've got allergies. Alright, so I mixed up some very dark green and some black. Put in a wee bit of oil because this will be very wee bit. I want to mix it with the paint a little bit because I don't want it to be shining, especially in this part that's going to be shadow. I really don't want to have too oily. Because I want it to recede. Not anything that's going to shine or have texture and catch light, anything that's going to be woo is going to come forward and grab my attention. These are going to be olive groves and hills and various trees, little pine trees and that kind of thing, and they can be quite dull, but I need them to be dark so that I pull the attention back into these light, colorful, bright areas that I'm going. But while I'm going to do this, I want it to be soft and dark, but I also want to use my strokes in a sort of a choppy way to imply foliage from distant trees. Now, note that I'm not painting every leaf, and that would be ridiculous to do. One, I don't see it in my reference either, so that would be really hard. But also, it's too far away to be painting every leaf. Even up here, I don't have every leaf painted, or any of these little spotches. I just have the hint of green. You want to get the strokes enough so you understand it. When I was doing the stone, I was going strokey this way because the bricks are not going to be pattern, but they are going to be in lines like this with the mortar separating them all. So I wanted to go do this direction, this direction, follow the line of the roof, and get this all in perspective. So this wall of stone is going this way, this one's going this way. But as I did it, I took a smaller brush. It's not really even small enough, frankly, actually, and I started off with the palette knife just to brush in, force myself into high texture, because I tend to paint quite thin, and I don't know why I like that, but it's they say it's not really particularly healthy, but I don't know. I have a problem with the confusion. I have a confusion with the chemistry of paints, because it seems that so many people that you speak to have different opinions about it. They all seem to have decent justifications for them most of the time. And I'm not one of those artists who enjoys doing lots of color tests and then sticking things out in the sun to let it wait for a while. I kind of want to decide that I trust certain people to say these pigments are long lasting and these are let people do what they do well and go on. But anyway, so to get back with this, I need to put this part here dark to help my brain say, yes, this does have to go dark, because if this is too light here and everything's relative, I don't have a relationship that makes me want to push that dark. So I can't just force myself. And when you're making a relationship between this building and this, for example, you're also better off making it between this and between that and between this one behind it, because everything has its place and everything is going to reinforce or enforce, it's not actually a word, is it? The idea that you're going to. And I'm going for the circle and the bright colors spotched along here. So right now, this is the part of the painting that's the least developed, and I want to go ahead and try to get that going. Now, these are going to be olive groves and plants and open areas that farmers have done. So that means it's not just a random bosco forest. It's going to have a little bit of order to it. So I want to have that impression in there. Excuse me, even if that's not the foremost thing in my mind. But I also, I don't want to think of it so much that I end up getting, again, a mathematical 1, 2, 3. I don't want stair steps on this hill. I want to break it up. Some of the plants are going to be, the trees closer to this building will be bigger, larger, because they're closer, and so then they're going to recede as they go around this hill. So right now I'm using a little bit bigger brush because I want to cover some territory, but also I want to have light, looser strokes and do some blending in it. I liked the little chicken scratch that I did here on that because I wanted that high texture. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my model, which I don't know if you can actually see it here or not. And I'm drawing as I paint. So I see the top of this roof here is this one here, okay? There's a little white thing up there, which is probably another building or maybe the chimney or something. It's hard to distinguish, which is fine. I don't need to... If you don't see it in your model, if you can sort of make it so that you also don't see it in your painting without making a nebulous blob, then I think you've done a good illusion, and it works. If you just try to go, oh, well, this is all just dark green, I can't really make it out, and so nobody else needs to make it out either, it's not going to really work somehow. I don't know if I can explain that, but when you look at people's paintings, start to really look at them and see why something bothers you and why something doesn't, or maybe make trees, for example, an assignment and say, I want to go to the museum and I'm going to look at this and figure it out. Why I like this tree better than other, or why is that one real? Why is this one 3D? Why is this one, the bark is brilliantly done, you know, and start to try to break it apart with what's going on. Now, in my model, I can see there's a field right in here, and I sort of had sketched out there. So the thing is, because I'm enlarging, I have to remember, I see this as a small space here, but obviously it's much larger size in there. It's maybe twice, maybe more than twice. No, actually, probably, I don't know, probably a wee bit less than 100% enlargement. So I see a little bump here and it flat, and then a little bump there and a flat. But this little bump is smaller than this one here, and this one goes above this thing. So I've kind of got them blocked in here. There's a little bump, and then I get a smaller there, and I go on. This is kind of going lower than this, and okay. So this is how it's going to continue. Now, what I see that there's a couple of little distractions that'll break up this shape from being just a straight thing, and I see it's a little dark in the field here. You can see from this reference that as I go back, and I want to be able to get into this dark stuff here, this Campitura now is sticking out as the lightest area thing in this thing, and of course the area of high contrast is where your eye is going to go. Now in my original you can see it's mostly dark except for the big bright colors and then the few spotlights. So I want to squint because sometimes I'm not really sure. If you squint your eyes here, you will see this building stands out too light. Do you see that? And also even all of these can go darker, especially these roofs. But also you're going to see this is like a wow, 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 that's super, super bright. So I'm going to work to get that down. Now, you can see here I've got one sort of mishmash green. I've got a darker with the green and the black together. This is a burnt umber, I believe. A burnt green, well, green umber, what am I saying? And so I'm mixing it up a little bit. And the thing is, our brain wants to make, when we're trying to be random, our brain wants to make it orderly. So you can think you're doing this randomly, but you'll see my circles were about the same size when I did that. I have to really concentrate to break it up. But even so, I'm using the right hand. So all the shapes are going to be, if I do it this way, I'm going to have maybe a little bit different slant to it naturally based on how I come to it. So you can just sort of change these things around. Every once in a while, I might throw in a wee bit of this sap green. It's going to be too bright, but the thing is, I don't really want it to be bright. I want it to give me a little bit of depth because there's a wee bit of change in color. And the other thing I have to decide is, I mentioned about wanting to add purple to sort of contrast, because this is a warm green. You see it's kind of a yellowish green versus a turquoisey bluer green. And then obviously the oranges are warm, and then I'm going to be adding in warmer oranges as I develop the darkness on this, because this needs to be darker. The street line is here going down. Do you see how my, oh excuse me, I bumped my camera. Do you see how my brain works? Is that one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. It's really a wonder I get anything finished. But as I probably mentioned before in another thing, the one thing I like about creative work of any kind is you learn how your brain works, because none of us choose our births or our bodies or any of that sort of thing, or any of it. So it's kind of nice when you have the freedom to create something, because what you're really doing is you're trying to understand, how does my brain put things together? How does my brain want to make something happen? And it's not a matter of judging or beating yourself up or something. I happen to be a slow-moving person, and I never really particularly was upset about it, but I also remember that my mother used to make jokes to me that if I moved any slower they'd bury me, and my father used to tell me that I work off the limited heartbeat theory, which, you know, as you might imagine, means that don't move too quickly or you use up all your heartbeats and then you're done. So when I think of those days, I realize has always been my nature, is to not move fast enough for most other people. My brain moves fast. The little hamster never seems to stop, which I wish he would sometimes. But I don't know, I don't function very well, and I think part of it is because everything's kind of connected and I'm trying to see the whole picture together, and it makes for a different way. But to get back to my point, we're born with the brains that we have, and I see things in triangles. So even though this is a rectangle, if I want to draw this, I can see this shape here of connecting these points easier than I can see the shape of a rectangle. Does that make sense? For example, if I want to draw this parallelogram, I can see that as a parallelogram, but can I see that it's too long or too short, or maybe the angles are wrong? Possibly, but if I triangulate it, all of a sudden it becomes really clear in my mind what that shape actually is. Circles, you put an equilateral triangle into a center and spin it, and you have a circle. So for me, triangles can make every single shape. My friend Daryl Pottorff told me that he sees everything in circles. I can't really get my head around that, but if you look at his artwork, he has circles. He puts bicycle wheels on his art. He likes to design in things that are this way. I think the painter Ang, the Ingres or ES, I can't remember names, I'm terrible about that. I think he was an oval painter. If you look at the shape of his portraits, the faces are oval, the shoulders are sort of ovally. So there's a gentleness to that. Maybe the triangles, because I tend to be a bit of a drama person, and so the triangles to me are a way to be very dramatic, whereas maybe a circle or definitely an oval would be a softer statement, wouldn't it? But it doesn't really matter that Daryl's brain sees things in circles and my sees in triangles. The thing that matters is that each of us is aware of how our brain functions, how it takes in information, and how it goes out, and what we need to do to work around our various kind of situations. So this also means that when you're painting or creating anything, you tell yourself certain things at different times in the process to make yourself go forward. For example, if I have a marble carving and I have a big piece of marble that I love, it could very well be that I'm going to have so much in my head about the potential of what that actually is going to be that it freezes me to start cutting into it, because I'm afraid that it won't live up to the thing in my head. So what happens is, after I live with that long enough and I'm pretty sure of the idea that I want to be doing, I tell myself, it's just a rock. It's not brain surgery. Nobody dies if I screw up the rock. The rock won't even hate me. I just need to get a move on and do something to this. Otherwise, it's going to remain just exactly it is, and I'm never going to know whether this thing in my head will be manifested, because I won't ever take a step towards it. And that's living in fear, and when you live in fear, you have to recognize it and then do something to change the dynamic of that. So, anyway, so I will tell myself, it's just a rock, just make a cut and start drawing, do something on there. And that usually shoves me forward to make a move. Conversely, when I get towards the end of the sculpture, I tell myself, oh my gosh, this is not just a rock. This could actually be a really good sculpture if I don't screw it up. And in a way, it doesn't freeze me in that case. What it does is it makes me slow down to say, I really need to think more than cut now. And this is the time where this is going to start to matter, and this is important to me. And now I really, really, really want to tread lightly, tread carefully, and make something that I feel good about, even if usually it doesn't match the original idea. I don't know why that happens, but stone is a living material, so is clay, so actually paint is all squishy and wishy, and you often hear artists say that it took on a life of its own, and a lot of that's kind of true. But to be fair, it can't take on too much of a life on its own without some sort of mental energy being added into that gives it that place of departure, and kind of helps us go on. Now, the other thing I want to do is, as I go back here, you see, I've got these edges. I need to stop being afraid to lose everything, because these edges need to start getting soft here. And see, even this, my main goal at this point is to knock things down so that I have the relationship of the darks. Oops, I just messed up my texture. I'd like to say I wanted to do that, but that was a Grace Kelly moment. That's my mother's nickname for me because I'm clumsy. And it's quite handy. Anyhow, I want these shadows, so even as I was doing the windows up here and stuff too, I was also working on getting softer edges in places. This, you see, there's just too much. See how much prettier that is now that I've knocked it down? You don't need to see all of the end of that building. Now, what I had on the brush, on this brush to do this, was some raw umber, I think, or yeah, it was raw, it wasn't burnt. And I just wanted to knock this down. And I'm doing streaky horizontal things because I know this is a farmer's field and it's going to be more horizontal. If I did all this, maybe it wouldn't make sense. It would look like perhaps vertical trees or something in the distance. And I want to imply what it is that I do by the direction of my strokes. So again, you see I've come full circle to what I started to talk about before and then I forgot. And then it comes back. So now, I don't necessarily want trees in the roof, but I don't really, you see, as that roof gets towards the back, I wonder if I can zoom in. That would be smart, wouldn't it? Is it working? I'll pull it here, maybe. Okay, so you can see a little bit more, maybe. So, anyway, this side of the roof is closer to me, so it can be sharper, and the one in the back should go away and recede into the distance. Plus, again, this is a night shot. So I took this raw umber here, and I've been sort of squiggling things around because the umber is going to be more neutral. I also want to knock down the chroma of this rooftop here. So raw umber is a good way to darken as well as mute the chroma. The high chroma means that the red is really, really red versus like a brick red, which would be muted. So do you see I'm already kind of working this in and doing this. Now, this is dry enough to glaze because I glazed it already earlier today, but I think I want to wait. And also, do you see how I got these splotchy sort of things? Just, this is a bristle brush. This is a bristle brush, meaning, I think, pig's hair, so it's rougher. This other red brush that my friend Llewellyn gave me from Zecchi's in Florence, I think it's a sable, and it's quite soft. And I like it for doing soft, subtle details, but I find I'm really enjoying this red-handled thing. It says Zecchi Friends, and maybe it's... No, it says something else in gold. Okay, good morning or good evening or whatever it is for you. So I'm starting to lay in some of the darks here, and I put in some purple in here, as I told you I might do. I'm trying to sort of match the tones, so this purple here is about the same tone. If you squint your eyes, you'll see they blend in where they almost become the same thing. We call this broken color, where you've got the same tone but you've got different hues. Okay, so then I'm starting to develop the grasses a little bit. I sort of put in these little odd little shapes here. The purpose of this is, well, one, it does exist in my reference to some degree, but also it's nice to not have a big shape like this where nothing's going on. So I did like the green and the purple here playing off with each other, but I like the striations to make it not one big flat shape. Because the other thing is, if you have a work with a lot of high texture, which I think I zoomed in where I cropped out what I was doing before, but if you have a lot of work with high texture, then a place that's very flat like this and very one tone and all that, it becomes the place of high contrast and your eye goes there. Well, that's not where my subject is, so there's no point in my eye going there, staying there as like the first thing. That's it's what they say, you always get the first impression. So I really want your eye to see, boom, the emotion first from what I saw. But anyway, so I'm going to put in enough of that to make it be background instead of competition for what I want you to see. So here I started adding in some darks to the trees. I don't know if you can see that so well, but I like this thing of going over things in layers because, for example, here are the trees that I had painted before. It's kind of one, maybe two tones, a dark and a light, maybe a little bit of variation in the darks, but I haven't really done a lot of that. Mostly it's just kind of to lay out and decide where they were, what the basic shapes were. But here you can kind of see in this area, I've gone in and I've dabbled some darks a little bit here. So now I'm starting to develop a little more information in these trees than those. I hope that shows. So yeah, I have a lot of blobby stuff going on in here, but it's fine because I don't want that to be so much stuff. And one of the things I learned from doing my mural of the Tuscan scene of Sorana is that I was trying to be really blotchy up close, and then when you go back, you say, oh, that's pretty tight looking. But I actually find this is developed really like I want. I think this is really kind of cool to be this sort of mushy and yet everything's there. But I want to bring this dark, one, to match the black. I decided not to do all the hills and stuff up here, and I was just going to let this fade off into black and give the eye a resting place to emphasize again the overall shape of things. But also, as I start to develop these darkers, these buildings clearly become too light, clearly become too contrast. And that's fine because these have now been dried for, I don't know, I mean it's oil paint, but I paint thinly, and also the wood will suck up the lower layers pretty fast. So I actually like it that I'm slow with oil paintings and then go work on different things, because I like to do this layering thing. And wet on wet paint is a lot of fun too, but there is another level that you can do if you just kind of let things sit and then go back to them later. I think it kind of helps me for some reason not have this fear of losing everything. I don't know why. That has to be something I remember. But so anyway, I don't really know what's going on in here, but I do see that somewhere I got a wee bit of purple in there, and then you have the yellowish green of the street light, and I kind of like that little play of color. However, this is the background. So this is the background that has to reinforce the foreground, the part that I've decided is subject. It's not to say that everything that's not exactly your one subject has to be boring and flat and non-noticeable. It's that I want your eye to go read the painting the way I want you to read it. In other words, when we read a book, we go left to right. And we know that as we put our sentence together, this is the structure of our language, whereas another language has a completely different structure, and the way that they form the ideas has the brain thinking in a different way. So it's the same when I'm using the visual language here of light, dark, shape, tone, color. I repeated a couple of those, but anyway. So yeah, I like this secondary interest, because if I just make, boom, one thing of interest and then it goes away, you're not going to stay looking at the painting. And it's really kind of fun to have a painting that gives you these little surprises in here to make you keep wanting to go back to it and go, I really like that, I appreciate that, or maybe I didn't notice that before, or something like that. So anyway, this developing the stuff is going on. Now, another thing I wanted to point out on this is totally boring to me. I don't like this much of a straight line here. It's like, okay, the road curves perfectly back. Really? They just cut all the little herbs. Now, the herbs, herba is grasses, and they're always talking about that in Italy. Cut the grass, cut the grass. They mostly mean on the roads because you can't see around them. But anyhow, so this shape is just too constant going back. And frankly, it's not that much, it's not narrower up here to show that I'm actually going back quite a bit of distance in here. So there's a wee bit of a perspective problem going on, but mostly I'm concerned about the boringness of it, because we like consistency to give us a safe feeling. We like change for interest and drama and just plain old fun, and to keep our brain engaged. So, but you know, too much busyness makes your brain exhausted, and too much of the other stuff makes you just not want to even bother looking at it. So what'll happen is I'm going to darken a little bit of this, and I'll probably go back in and start darkening some of these as well, to put them all in context. But in the meantime, my brain is going to be thinking, how do I want to break up this shape here? I don't really have a lot of information in my reference, but I do have a little darker shape up here going on. And I don't know that I want the cars, but there's some stuff going on in the reference that maybe I can use to do something. But the main thing is to notice I need to break up the shape. Part of the way that this developed was because as I was laying in the darks here, I can't really see what's going on in these trees. So, and the problem is, because I'm trying to rest my bad knee a lot, I don't get up and stand back and walk and look from a distance as often as I normally would, because normally I'd be painting on my feet. And when you paint on your feet, it's so much easier for you to have the habit of getting back and looking at different viewing point distances because you're up already. When you sit down, getting up takes a bit of an effort, and it's a sort of a distraction. So that's a bit annoying, but I need to heal my knee so that I can start walking again and getting back to where this is comfortable all day. So anyway, I'm going to keep working on this, thinking about this going in, and also thinking about getting the rest of this high texture to match with this fuzzy stuff. What am I going to do? So as you can see a little bit here, as I'm painting in, I'm sort of building up texture, not as much as this, but more than that. Okay, it has to be a path. The other thing is, you can see now as I darken this yellow house is standing out too bright. It's just a little bit too much contrast going on. These other houses here will also have to go a wee bit darker, but I need to be specific again because there's going to be light hitting based on these street lights that are all, there's more concentration of the street lights here, so they're going to share the wealth a little bit. And I want more dimension put in there. This building here, I don't know if that's showing in the video crop, but you could see the green light started, and then there's a little window there, but it got kind of dark here, and then it has another plane. There's probably a light over here shining on that face, but I can start developing. These lights are going to be aiming downwards, and I can make some of that kind of more interesting. And again, the red has to be muted, very much muted. This should not be the same brightness as that, for example. Doesn't matter how many street lights are on there. I need to give the distance idea is more important than the color grabbing attention. So I'll talk to you in a wee bit. Ciao. Thank you. Okay. Gosh, it's so annoying, that glare. Let me put some board. So if I put a board over that, it's kind of interesting, but anyway, okay, so I thought this might be kind of fun for you to see. What I did was I did the little dark squiggles in here I told you is to add the layers in, and I kind of like the effect because what's happening is it's a little bit of more interest instead of this soft furry blur, so that it starts to look a little more textured to match the rest of the painting, which I think I zoomed in to crop out. Yeah. So anyway, it's too much, and it's too much competition still. So I layered in my squiggles. I darkened this by adding the sap green. This is the green umber, and sometimes a wee bit of black mixed in there. So now I cleaned off my brush because I should use a ton of brushes like most painters do, but I tend to use just 2 or 3 and keep wiping them off all the time. But anyway, this is the soft sable brush I think I told you about that my friend Llewellyn bought me for my birthday one year from Zecchi's and Manova Kominski or something like that, Italy. Okay, anyway, so that's enough on the technique stuff. Oh, and I did want to say that I haven't really been speaking about the paint itself, but blacks, the umbers, I was taught that they basically need a lot of oil. They really like to have oil. They don't really like to meet up with mineral spirits. So try to minimize how often you dip your brush into that and whatever. But I don't like to paint with too much oil because then you end up having this soppy, nasty thing that gets all glary on you and stuff. So you got to find a happy medium to that. And there are exceptions to when we do tenebrism. I was thinking the other day I should see if I've got enough good photographs of my tenebrism Giuseppe's tools and see if I can make a video out of that, because it might be kind of fun. We'll see. Another diversion from painting for me. But so anyway, I cleaned off my brush, dried it off, and now I want to come in and I want to sort of keep this squiggle thing going on, but I want to soften all the edges, and I want to, again, put it back into being in the background. Now, what I find on this is go around very soft. I don't want mine blending as long as I don't get back to where I was before. But often I find only do a couple of little things and then dab your brush off. And if it gets to where there's too much paint on the bristles, then after that, you've got to clean it off and do it, or pick up another brush that doesn't have anything on it. Because if I want the brush to be relatively clean, I'm here to soften and blend, as I guess most people would use a fan brush for this. I tend to just use any brush that's quite soft. And don't want to get rid of all of it. So sometimes what I do is what I did here in the corner is I put these little squiggles in, and you see the sharp edges around here? That's not really good. It's not helping dimensions. What it looks like is a cutout blob put on top of a background, which is what it is. But I'm trying to create an illusion here, and I don't necessarily want it to be obvious that that's what I'm doing, is putting a blob on. But I kind of want that to dry a little bit so that when I go in, I don't lose all of it. I just lose enough. If I soften the edges enough, not only does it put it into the distance, but more importantly, it connects this object here to the rest of the painting. I don't know if you've ever seen a still life, but if somebody paints the apple and they've got it totally outlined on the edge around the whole thing, it looks as if they cut it out and stuck it on. So you've got to have some of these soft edges that mix in to the rest of the painting to connect it for that. You want to leave your hard edges for points, but you don't want everything to be hard all the way around. You don't want it to be soft all the way around. Although if I were going to err on one side or the other, I would put soft all the way around. And it is generally easier to make a hard edge out of a soft one than it is to make a soft out of an edge. But the thing that's interesting to me is what is a hard and soft edge? And basically, if I have a sharp edge here, it means I've got a dark tone against a dramatically lighter one. Doesn't always have to be dramatically, but it's a defining of tone. It's how quickly does the tone change when they come together, and the quicker it is, the sharper the edge looks. So if I want to soften, like I think I told you I softened all of these things. Well, part of it was instead of having a dark against a light, I had a dark, medium, 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 light, getting lighter, a gradation. It went very quickly in a very small space of time, but just having those gradations in there is what makes the edge softer. So do you see the difference here with what I'm doing now? I'm also going to see mushing some of those darks into, I have too much light into that area. And the thing is with the sap green is a quite a bright green, and oops, I didn't, it puts too much high chroma in here, but I mix it with black or a gray. Mixed black and white both are things that dull the chroma, and if you put it in with the right tone, you can get a duller color, but of the tone that you need. So, good grief, I'm nasally. So anyway, I'm breaking my own room because when I talk too much, I forget I've got to dab a little too. And here I can see it's not really moving. Maybe depending on where it is in the painting, it could be that the wood is really sucking out the juice really fast. So you want to not have it sit too long. But you know, if you sit too long, then you can just take a bristle brush or something that's not so fragile as these sweet, delicate things. But then this one is really tough. And I can come in and I can go, yeah, and really, can you hear it? You hear the scrubbing. And what I'm doing right now is I'm softening this edge here where I told you I don't really like the evenness of this shape. But I don't want to go to bed this evening having this dry as a sharp edge. I can always find it, but I don't want to have to try to lose it later, and I don't want it physically standing up. So, another thing I was going to tell you is often when you're finishing a painting in this sort of style, you go with a fan brush or a very light brush. I often use this thing I bought some time ago. It's very, very soft, but I like the fact that it's wide because you stop having so much of the bristle. But anyway, you do a downward stroke on this, it's a softening thing, but the other thing is, if you see strokes a lot of times going this way, lights are generally coming from the top. So that means, like it did on my buildings down here, that means if I've got things sticking out, the light hits it, and it gives you a little bit of texture, a little bit of sun on that, and that's what you want. But when you're into a background area or an area of darks, you don't want the light to be hitting that. So you go vertical strokes, because if I did it this way, I'm basically creating a bunch of tiny little ridges like this, light, shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow. It doesn't make it go away. If I do vertical, the odds are, no matter how the person who buys this painting hangs it, if they put the light here, or if the light's coming here, or if it's like my fluorescent that I have in this room here, it's going to be coming from the top. You won't see the groove so much because everything's going into the vertical, so it sort of makes that all gonna kind of go away. So that's a plus, because it's really not fun when you buy a painting and you can't enjoy it because there's too much oil or too much distraction of the stroke catching the light in there. So now I don't want to be pulling these greens into the building. I want to soften the edges with the buildings, but I don't want green rooftops. And even though you're working in a dark tone, it's good to work with a fair amount of decent light, even regardless of its temperature at times. But it's good because you can see the difference between the black and the dark green. It is there. It shows up more in photographs, which I find interesting, because if you think that you're so subtle on your art and then you photograph it, all of a sudden the contrast makes you go, well, really? Was that all that noticeable? I really need to work on my subtlety. So, okay. I don't know if this is soft enough yet to make me happy. I don't want to be redoing it too often. I see there's a little bit of paint right in there, so maybe it needs, there's a little bump or something that's catching the light, and I think that's going to be annoying because it's kind of in the middle and doesn't, oh, there, okay, so that was a little thing that probably happened in the preparation of the wood. So I bumped off that physical bump, and now I can just kind of find something with paint on it and paint over it. So there. Now that's not so distracting. I don't know if that can show up in the video or not, but they're just things that you want to look for. Now this has some texture in it. I hope you see that it's a bit different from when I just layered in all the colors. I'm getting a little more mushy here because it's kind of drying in there. I want to leave it like this, and because when I wake up in the morning I can have a fresh look at it, decide if I like how it's going. I'm trying to get rid of this soft edge here again. Have I made, for example, this shape of this tree and that shape of that tree? Are they too close together? Do I need to make one bigger than the other? Do I need to make this a third tree here? Maybe it already is, and I just don't know because I'm too close. So there'll be a lot of evaluation, but at least here it's more consistent with this. I'm going to soften that edge right there a little. And more than likely, because I really do jump around a lot when I paint, is this is going to be good enough now. Now when I come back tomorrow, or whenever I'm able to work, because actually tomorrow's a doctor and school day, but now when I come in, the thing that's going to bother me the most is how light these buildings are, especially these in the back with the PF Church and then Bell Tower. And then I'll work here, and then, okay, and maybe this needs to go a little bit darker as I go here. But again, this is a good stopping point. It's all kind of consistent. Everything is kind of soft, and yet I've left enough texture here to see what's going on. Maybe I want to dull this sap green down to make it more matching into that. And we'll see. But again, it's a building process. I've got this soft enough now that now I don't see the street so annoying, but now I have the ability to come in and really take a look at that and study and decide what I want to do with that. I mean, maybe I want to put a stone wall right there. I don't think I want so many cars lining it like the reality does, but we'll see. Sometimes reality's actually not a bad thing, but I can see right now this contrast here is too great with the dark trees here and the light hitting this thing. I don't have a street light there, so there shouldn't be that much light hitting that, even if I can't see the street light, which I doubt. But all right, I'm rambling too much, and we'll see you the next time. Ciao, ciao.